The next thing that I would like to talk about is something called publish and subscribe. Here's the core idea of publish and subscribe. Meteor is so magical that it's very easy to forget about how a web browser works. So here, let me just pull up a photo of this. Okay, so here's basically the three main components of any sort of web application that we're creating. Usually have a data layer, that's your database, right? Then we have a web server layer, that's what lives in the cloud somewhere and is remote. And then our client, the piece of our app that's actually shipped to their browser and runs on the user's computer. So here's the challenge. Meteor is so magical that there's an obvious flaw with how this system is working. By which I mean, because Meteor tries to make all of the data available in your app to the client, there's a couple challenges that arise with that. So the first one would be, if you have a colossal database, you don't want to ship the whole database to the client because you'll just crash their browser window. For example, let me go to our app here. So we only have a couple cats here, but why don't I insert a few more cats. Let me see. Oh, title, not name. Let me see. I'm not logged in. Okay. So I just inserted a cat, which we see right here. Now I'm going to insert a whole bunch of cats. Now, one challenge that would happen is that when we would go to this cats page, it would only load, it would try to load every single cat that we just inserted. Let's say we have 10,000 cat documents in our collection. Well, when they try to ship all of that, when we try to ship all that data information to our client, that's instantly going to bring down the browser window. It'll just totally freeze and crash. So you'll notice here, however, on this cats list, if I scroll to the bottom, oh, it looks like it already loaded them all. So it's kind of hard to demonstrate without having a really large data set, but the way this list is built out is that if you scroll to the bottom of the list, it will load more cats as you need it, right? So let me here's a better demonstration of this functionality. Let me go to Facebook. So if I'm on Facebook, notice here how when I scroll down, it shows that thing for a second, which basically means like, oh, hey, I'm loading more. See, it's loading more, loading more. And if you look at my bar on the right here, you'll actually see that I scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and then the bar ticks back up as more items load at the bottom of the page. So what that is doing is every of these lists that you have for your collections in your app does that same sort of feature automatically. That's called infinite scroll. What that means is the idea is that as long as there are more collection items to look at, you can just keep scrolling and we'll load additional items as needed instead of trying to load all 50,000 at once and totally crashing their browser window. And eventually, if they scroll far enough, we'll actually start to drop some of the earlier items that we loaded in from memory so that we don't run out of memory on the client. So another way to think about that is that, let's say, here's our database. So like this line right here represents like all the data we have in our database. At any given time though, we only want a smaller subset. So this is like our full database. Here's our like client. We only want a smaller subset of the data that's available on the full database actually available to the client at any given time. So that could be this subset of data, it could be this subset of data, it could be different subsets throughout here. But we need to actually programmatically control how much of our database data we send to our client. One, so that we can keep our client snappy and efficient if it doesn't have to load tons of data. And the other reason we might want to control this is, let's say we have some data that only certain users should be able to see, like maybe a merchant or an admin or something, right? And we don't want to just go ahead and push that data to every client where they can just open up the console and start querying things and gathering information, right? We only want them to see what they're supposed to see, right? So that's how we'll use publish and subscribe. So another way to think about publish and subscribe is publish is always on the server. It's exactly what it sounds like. We publish a subset of the data from our database on the server. And then our client, we subscribe to a given publication in order to get that data. Now, our generator does a lot of this for you already, and I'm going to show you an example. So if you go to your whatever your collection name is, and then take a look at your JavaScript file, you'll notice, oh, sorry, it's not in the lib folder, it's actually in the server folder. So this publish information, we don't want to send to the browser. We want that to be private code that's only available on the server, because it just makes our app a little bit, it's a strategy called security through obscurity, basically meaning that by obscuring what data is available, or maybe we are going to obscure the code that we use to publish the data, so it makes it harder for someone to try to take advantage of those publications. Don't worry about it too much right now. Just know that like the publish stuff has to go under this catsecurity.js file we have here. And so right here you'll see this syntax where we have meteor.publish cat. So I basically have created a publication named cat, and then the second piece of a publish call is a callback. So when someone subscribes to the cat publication, this code is run. And a publication always returns a list of results. So notice here how I'm doing cats.find, and then I find a specific cat based off its ID. We are not doing find one. Never use find one inside of a publication. Or never return find one is really what I should say. You always have to return find because, I don't know if you guys remember, so let's go back to our console here. So if I say cats.find, we get this really weird object returned to us called a cursor. Basically what a cursor is it's like it's a commitment to return the data later. So we're saying cats.find, we're basically saying give us all the cats. Well, that's a big request. And so Meteor doesn't want to freeze our whole app while it tries to make that request. Instead, it has this cursor object that is basically like saying, hey, you've queried all the cats. Here's a cursor that will, once all the cats have come back from the database, then we'll populate them all. Don't worry too much about the semantics. Just know that when you call find one, it returns the document to you immediately because there's only one. But when you call find, it returns this thing called a cursor. So how do we get all the values from a cursor? Well, that's where we type .fetch. .fetch basically says, hey, we're going to query all of the cats, and now I want you to fetch those results right this second. So we can see the output right here. So the takeaway of all this is that publications return cursors. So you only return a find call whenever you create a publication. Now, a publication can also take a parameter. In this case, we have a cat ID parameter. So on the client, when the client is going to call subscribe, we're going to pass that cat ID to this publication, and then that's what, and then we will publish that document back to the client. So let's take a look at that. So basically on our client side, we would say meteor.subscribe cat, and then, actually, you know what? Let me show you this inside of WebStorm. So here's a good example. If we go to our pages and we go to the cat collection pages, and let's say we look at view one cat page, and we open the JavaScript for that. Right here, we are subscribing to a cat. So we basically say, hey, I want to subscribe to a cat document. Which cat document do I want to subscribe to? Well, I want to subscribe to the one of the ID that we're currently looking at on our URL. So basically, when we go to one of these pages, such as this one, we take this ID off the URL, and then we let the server know that we would like that information by doing this subscription. So think of it as nothing more than on the server side, we're going to create all these publication functions, and then on the client side, we will call subscribe, which will basically just let us get the information from those publications. So there's a lot here. So I highly recommend that you perhaps take a read through the documentation. So if you go to meteor.com, and actually I think if you go to the tutorial, right here, publish and subscribe, this is a really good explanation of how to use publish and subscribe, and it explains exactly why you're doing it. So here's a nice little tip though while you do this. If you want to just turn on all publications, meaning you don't want to just publish a subset of your database, you just want to have all of it available on the client, you can do the following command. You can do meteor add auto publish. Auto publish is exactly what it sounds like. It just immediately publishes all the data available on your database to the client. Now that obviously will not work in a production environment because you'll have too much data and it will crash your app. So if you're using the auto publish package, you should only use it for testing purposes. So I personally don't code with auto publish turned on because I find that when I have auto publish turned on, I forget to write my subscriptions and publications, and then all this stuff breaks later on when I remove it. However, for you guys, it might be easier just to turn on auto publish and code away doing that, and then before you go to host your app, remove auto publish and then just figure out what the publications you need to build out from there. Now here's the good news about all this seemingly complicated feature. I've done the majority of the work for you. So This list page, to get that infinite scrolling thing working, that's a bunch of crazy auto publish and subscribe logic. You never have to write a single line of code to get that to work. That will work out of the box for you. And then when you look at one of these pages, here, you'll just notice in the route, the view one page code, that's just where we subscribe. So my generator has taken care of most of the work for you. So the only publication we have right out of the bat is just publishing one document on the collection. And then we just subscribe to that one publication when we are currently on that page, right? So basically we're saying, hey, we're on the view one cat page. Let's make sure we're subscribed to the data to show that cat. That's all there is to it. So when would you need to write your own publish and subscribe? Probably when you are showing, if you create a new page and you are showing multiple different documents on that page. Let's say we had a dog collection while we were at it. Well, we would need a publication to publish the dog, and we would need a subscription to get access to that dog. So that's what the biggest thing you should think about here is just if you have any pages in your app where you are showing multiple documents simultaneously on one page and you're not using my default boilerplate, like you aren't just using that is actually going to crash this. So let me count that out. Where you aren't just using my built-in templates, whether it's for listing a collection or for looking at one document in that collection like this, let's say we added a dog field over here. That's when you need to add a new subscription to that additional data that you need. So just to reiterate over this whole thing, the syntax is actually really quite simple. The way to think about this is that, hey, we don't want to publish our entire database. So the client needs to subscribe selectively to different pieces of that data at any given time. And the way you'll see how our boilerplate is set up, we do all of our subscription code inside of our routes. This is a great way to manage our subscriptions because now, we could just say meteor.subscribe, cats, and just like publish it all and put it right here inside of isClient. And as soon as the client loaded, it would just try to subscribe to all of that data. That's not very efficient. It's much more efficient for us to selectively subscribe to the data when we're on the page that needs to show it. And that's why subscriptions make a lot of sense under the routes. Because we're basically saying, hey, we won't subscribe to this cat data until we actually go to this cat page. That way we can keep our clients snappy and relatively selective with the data that it's loading. Now, this does take a minute to wrap your head around. My suggestion would be there's lots of documentation out there on publish and subscribe. Read through the Meteor documentation on it. Read through that page on the tutorial, just to make sure you have your head wrapped around it. So this is definitely one of the most advanced features in Meteor. Now, the code for it is quite simple, but thinking about it logically can get a little bit more complicated. So again, just to reiterate, the best way to probably think about it is, when we need to show certain data on a given page, let's make sure we're subscribing to it.